Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Finding You podcast. My name is Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Thursday, October 3rd, 2024. You might be new to these broadcasts. If you're surprised by the name, we've recently changed the name of these broadcasts to the Finding You podcast by Dr. Brad Reedy. This is now under the umbrella of our new program, Finding You Therapy Programs. Our website will be up in the next day or two. It'll be findingyouprograms.com. You can go to drbradreedy.com in the meantime to find all of our programming and information. Any questions you have, this is a live Q&A. What I'm going to do is a couple of times a month, I'm going to host these live question and answers. I thought maybe we wouldn't do this, but I got just as many emails thanking me for the Q&As as I did for the topics. So we'll do 4 topics a month. We'll do 2 live Q&As a month. You can always send in requests, suggestions, questions to info@findingyouprograms.com. That's info@findingyouprograms.com. Those will then go to the top of the queue. If you want copies of slides from any of my topic presentations, I'm happy to provide those for you if you simply email those there. So I'm going to go ahead and launch into the first question, which reads like this. My daughter was at Evoke from July 2023 to October 2023. It was the best decision we made for her mental health. Then she went to a therapeutic boarding school through April of this year. We've had our ups and downs, but for the most part, she's doing well at home. We went through a lot of chaos before we sent her to Evoke, and I'm still trying to deal with that. I want to reconnect to her, but I'm leery. What are your suggestions on how to reconnect with her? Great question. I want to share with you how I would have answered this question 15 years ago. And then I'll give you the answer that I'll give today. 15 years ago, I would have said to you, just be leery. If you are feeling distrust, that is natural, and you can express that to her. I probably would have tied it to the idea of some sort of natural consequence for the series or old betrayals or lies that you've experienced. I would definitely have encouraged you 15 years ago not to shame or put that weight on her, but I would have suggested to you that your feelings are valid, and that if she's honest with herself, she'll recognize the leeriness, if you will. I used to teach the idea that trust is something you decide, and I still believe this. Trust is something you decide, and that sometimes the idea is you have to own it. I don't trust, or I feel leery, or I feel anxious to kind of give you back my trust, the freedom, and so forth. And I would have made this point by pointing out that some people trust people who have lied, who have a history of deception. Some people don't trust anybody, no matter what's going on in their present life, because of some historical past trauma. So the idea would be that you ultimately have to own your trust or distrust. It's here, I trust or I don't trust. So I would have taught you that. I would have told you just to be authentic and present. I think what I want to add to that answer today is that I think that sharing your distrust is something that you have to be very mindful of, very thoughtful about. I would say today something I wouldn't have said 15 years ago, which is a lot of that energy might be best expressed in a safe place, which might not be your daughter or your spouse or whoever you're talking about. That this idea that we need to be able to tell everybody everything all the time, and that's not what you're saying, but sometimes people can't hold it. They're incapable of containing, and so we would be wise to pick and choose. Now, I go to a therapist every week, and I do this because there are times when I want to express unfiltered, raw feelings and energy. Having done that, then I can go to the person that I'm focused on, the person that I'm thinking about in terms of these feelings, and I can communicate in a much more regulated way. So I think what I would add to what I would have said 15 years ago is make sure that you're talking to somebody, ideally a professional. That's my position, that they occupy a role and a space in our lives that even no friend or no spouse could ever live up to. So talk to somebody, a sponsor, a mentor, a trusted friend who's capable of doing it, but ideally perhaps a professional. Get that energy out so that when you go to your child, in this case, to express it, you own it. Number one, it's not layered with a lot of energy. and you're mindful of your expression because you don't want to lay on top of them anything that could potentially cause shame. And of course you can't control what they feel, but you don't want to not do your work. You don't want to not do your preparation. You want to take care of yourself. So take care of yourself, get a professional audience, if you will, get as much energy out as you can. And then when you go to your child, in this case, your daughter, express it lightly, express it with ownership. This is what's going on for me. I'm working on it in therapy. You can even say, not in the sense that you're apologizing for the feelings, but just recognizing the emotional impact that they have. Say, I'm sorry, this is where I'm at. I might need time to heal. But when you add that part about the fact that you're taking time and energy to take care of that with somebody else, that's what gives her the safety. So I don't think it's really, I don't think you're capable of hiding it. I wouldn't want you to lie about it. I also wouldn't want you to express it in a raw, unfiltered way to the child because that's likely to load very heavily. But when you combine all of these ideas, I think you can come with an effective way to reconnect. You're modeling for her self-care. You're modeling for her boundaries. You're modeling for her that you're taking responsibility for your feelings, for your own life, that you recognize that you need help. It's so valuable when parents go to therapy. Just when they go to therapy, it's so valuable because the child then has the experience, or the spouse then has the experience, that I'm not the only one with the problem. And I think that that's the best way to build a bridge back, to reconnect. And it might take some time for all of that trust, all of that old energy to dissipate. And you have to take your time and do it on your own timeline. Remember that forgiveness comes not on the terms of the person who's done the offending, but on the terms of the person who's been offended. And you get to have your time. I would say I'm wise enough now that I take some really heavy, intense feelings to my therapist so that I can show up in relationship to those that I'm close to in a much more regulated way. Thanks for the question. Wonderful question. All right. Somebody writes, can you tell me more about why Finding You Intensives is run in a group setting instead of one-on-one? I don't feel as comfortable in the group as I would alone with a therapist. You know, I cannot tell you how often this question comes in. I'll give you a few reasons or a few ideas. Number one, and I've said this before, you know, we started our Finding You Intensives. We have our first one in October. We have another one virtually online in November. We might add an in-person one in November. I'm going to be running the one in December. So I can't emphasize enough that you learn as much from the group as you do from doing your own work. And that the safety that you experience, because it's led by a therapist, because the ground rules and the safety, the guidelines are set up by the therapist and by the program, but the safety that you experience in that context by your peers is the most profound thing. I talked to somebody today who keeps in contact with their group, and they referred to another friend who just had another follow-up meeting with their group. It's the one thing therapeutically that I've sold, I've pitched, the one therapeutic product that I pitched that has almost 100% satisfaction. It's a more dynamic processing group. Yes, it is a greater risk, but what you will find is you'll experience safety at a level that you've never experienced. In fact, you'll experience not only safety at a level that you've never experienced, but you'll develop skills and tools to respond to other people. Somebody will share something that might even be a trigger for you. We've had situations where individuals have to step out of the room respectfully during somebody's share because they're triggered by it, where both people in that equation, in that exchange, are perfectly within the bounds of healthy communication, assertive communication, and even been more connected after the fact. So the group process is invaluable. And so many, it's actually much more challenging as a therapist to run an individual one to create the kind of dynamics and richness that we create in our group processes. So I recommend them wholeheartedly. I recommend them from a place of, it's like that old hair commercial, I think it was, you know, I am a customer myself. I do this myself. And I believe that that's why we started Finding You programs after Evoke closed, because we thought this is something that is, it's an incredible product. it makes a big difference. It's almost always something that people walk away from with a big transformational experience. And I'll say one last thing before I get off of this. And this isn't specific to the question of the group versus individual. But I will say that the work isn't done when you're done with Finding You, a Finding You intensive. It's not done. It's a springboard into your work if you're new to your work. If you're in therapy, I was in therapy with my therapist for 10, 12 years, I believe, when I went to my first therapy intensive. And I thought to myself, I had the most gifted, intelligent therapist I've ever met in my life. And I thought, what could this possibly do? But I had friends encouraging me. I was looking for something to get unstuck out of this rut that I was in. And I attended my intensive, and I would say that the therapist was incredible. The experience was incredible, but the group work was the thing that made the difference. And it catapulted me into new levels of awareness because I lived through them experientially. It wasn't just one-on-one. So I could go on about it, but it's the most effective or it's the most effective structure that I've ever seen to create transformational, fundamental change in people. And it for me, it's at least 6 months of therapy in 4.5 days. So thank you for that. Somebody writes this. Sometimes I feel like the mediator or peacekeeper between my wife and my young adult child. I do my best to support both of them, but both seem to want to recruit me for their own way of thinking. Even if I believe that my wife is not taking the appropriate approach in the way she communicates with my daughter, she expects me to take her side and support her as a partner. Any thoughts on how to navigate getting caught in the middle? I have some experience with this myself. I think probably most co-parents who have an adequate, a good relationship with their co-parent are going to experience these kinds of differences. Great question. I think my thinking and where I've evolved with this is I can say to my wife, this happened to us this week in a different context. I can say to my wife that I support you, I'm empathic, but I see things differently. I see and feel differently about it. I don't want to interrupt your process. I've shared the idea that one of the moments when I was most proud of my mental health is when I was sitting in the kitchen some years ago, many years ago, and my wife and my youngest daughter, at the time she was in grade school, got into an argument over a Mother's Day present. And my wife became dysregulated. The child was dysregulated. Eventually, I think the present that she made at school was ripped into shreds because she wanted my wife to open it earlier. My wife wanted to open it on the day of Mother's Day. And I sat and minded my own business. And without saying a word, after the discussion had ended and my daughter was in a different room, my wife came up to me and said, "Thank you." And I know what she was thanking me for. She was thanking me for staying out of it. Now, just like I referred to the other day, she asked me to not just listen to her in a specific instance, but to agree with her. And that's a different ask. My wife had shared some feelings about an interaction that we had had. And I said, I get it. I hear it. I understand. And then she said, I want more. And it was my mistake. I've even shared on these broadcasts that I've learned not to do this, but I was feeling overwhelmed and stressed and dealing with a lot of things. And I went ahead and answered and shared all of my thoughts. And of course, that led to a quick escalated discussion that ended in kind of silence between the two of us. What I have learned, what I want to do in those situations is to say, look, I have lots of thoughts. I have lots of feelings. I have lots of reactions. But I'm here to listen to you. It's not helpful or healthy for us to do this kind of back and forth, especially on the heels of my wife or me, whoever it is, being dysregulated. And I love that you use this word recruit, that each of the parties in this dynamic recruit you to see things from their way. That's a communication fallacy or mistake that people make when they're not willing to just own their own process, to own their own experience. When I was young, when I was fresh out of graduate school, they taught us that the number one thing is that parents be aligned on all things, that superseded anything else in the parenting dynamic. I found that not to be true. I have different. I mean, if it's every rule, if it's every behavior, that becomes a problem, right? If you're living in the same home and people are giving out different rules, that's of course different. But it's okay, and our children know that we feel different. Our children know that we feel different. Everything else is going to feel like a lie and this kind of contrived coalition between us. So I think for you and your wife, it's getting to the point of recognizing that you have different ideas and perspectives. And when the iron is cold, that idea of striking while the iron is cold. When the iron gets cold, that's the time to have discussions about those differences. But in the moment, my response is the best, most compassionate, healthiest thing I can offer you is support, empathy, non-judgment, my heart, my hand, my presence. But to have to agree with somebody when we have different ways of seeing it doesn't help anybody. Doesn't help the child or the parent. Somebody writes in and says, I think my daughter is stealing from me. I keep finding new items that she must have stolen. I want to confront her, but I'm afraid that will just drive her away or cause her to hide more. I think about this kind of question all the time about if I confront the issue, if I bring the issue up, it could drive a wedge. And sometimes I make adjustments based on me anticipating that with my wife, with my child, with whomever I'm considering. Because sometimes there is room in me to compromise that. In this case, my curiosity would be what's going on with the daughter, if she is stealing, or what's the underlying dynamic. So ideally, I would approach her when the iron is cold and with curiosity and saying something like, I've noticed that there are some things, and I'm kind of wondering, it seems like you may have stolen these things. It seems like these might not have been purchased. I don't understand. And I would de-emphasize the correctness or not of the behavior. That's the key. And try to say, I'm not worried about that so much. Let's deal with that secondarily. I'm just wondering what's going on, and I just want to be curious. One thing that I've learned in this work is that if we can avoid focusing on the right or the wrong behavior, just temporarily, and get to the underlying issues, instead of saying to your substance abusing sibling, I notice you're drinking a lot, you can say to them, how are you doing? How's it going? My wife will say to me at time when I'm acting out, she'll say, how are you? And it's like a reset for my prefrontal cortex to remind me that something in my system is off, that I'm feeling threatened, and that my threat response, my defense is in high alert, is highly active. So you can talk about it. She still might be reactive, but at some point, that's a discussion that I think you're going to find that you need to have, even at the risk that she's going to pull away. But if you stay regulated, if you realize, this is an important point, with all of these kinds of discussions, any kind of discussion where you anticipate it going bad at first, prepare yourself for that. When I coach people to have these kinds of conversations, I will say to them, remember that the first reaction, the first version, the first iteration of this conversation is not the last one. You're in this for the long game. So wait. The next day, the next night, later on in the afternoon, that discussion is going to be much better. I do it when I'm encouraging intervention, for example. You invite a young adult or a spouse to go into treatment, and you can expect that it's not going to go well. So the key is to monitor your nervous system, to be prepared for the pushback. And then the last skill that I will offer, last idea that I will offer you, is the one that's one that I talk about all the time. That's one of my favorites, and that is this: you cannot win, you can only choose how to lose. So with all the skills, tools, and ideas that I've shared with you, that's the last one. You can't win, you can only choose how to lose. And in this case, I would eventually choose how to lose by having some version of this conversation, even if I fumble all the aforementioned skills, tools, and ideas that I've mentioned tonight. And that the second discussion or the next morning or later on that day, I'm going to have a better discussion, even if I became dysregulated. So for me, over the long term, I would not choose how to lose by trying to maintain the peace and avoiding what would be for me, and I assume for you, a very important discussion about stealing. So thank you for that. Very complex. Somebody writes this. I'm a stepmom of an 18-year-old with severe ADHD. Hygiene has been an issue since I've known the child since age 9. Now that he's 18, he wants more autonomy, yet his hygiene is awful. The issue is not getting better, no matter how much we talk about it. Tell me what thoughts you have on dealing with this. Gosh, that time of adolescence, of the adolescent brain, which neurologists consider to be 13 to 25, is absolutely challenging. There's no doubt about that. There are times when I have to shut off. I have to walk away from a situation. Now, if it rises to the level, you're talking about hygiene. You're not talking about life and death or stealing or drug use or misuse or anything like that. So I'm answering in the context of that relatively low level concern of yours. Part of it is to wait until there's a time when he is clean and to talk about it. That's one of those. It's very similar to the previous question. That you're taking the risk that it's going to be offensive, that he's going to be driven away. You can also tolerate the fact that he's stinky and messy at times. Sometimes I've done that. I know when when I'm in a situation where there's a child with severe ADHD or executive functioning or somebody on the spectrum, there's an extra degree of empathy, of patience, of non-judgment that enters into it for me. I think a lot of the ways that we might naturally deal with something like hygiene is shaming, overtly shaming. So I think, again, you don't get to choose how to win. You don't get to win. You get to choose how to lose. It's okay to ignore stuff, to let him learn natural consequences. Is there something in the diagnosis that is significantly contributing to this issue? Does that add empathy and non-judgment so that when you do have the discussion, it is not so charged with emotions? I think that's the thought process that I would go along as I'm thinking about how to deal with this. And there are times when I contain my children, when they say stupid, silly things, when they have crazy ideas. And I am as proud as anything that I do in those moments when I'm holding space, when I'm not confronting every little thing. I'll end with one last principle. It's something that I learned actually as a therapist before I learned it as a father and as a spouse, as a friend. And that is, I was asking one time after having a wonderful session with a client I had worked some time with, and they had shared really insightful shares. They started the session with a bunch of insightful information. They'd had some extraordinarily difficult conversations with other adult family members, and it had gone very well. And I was just impressed with how much the work was taking root and how much courage this client was demonstrating as they shared all of this. And at some point, after sharing all this, they said a couple of other things that were just like the old way of thinking, that sounded much more regressed, much less evolved than the first several minutes of their sharing in the session. And I didn't say anything, not knowing what to do with it. I had, of course, that instinct in my body because of my own training and my own background. My own codependency which is both my superpower and my fundamental flaw. Right? They're the same thing. It's about how to use them. I went to my therapist for supervision afterwards, and I told her this story, and I asked her what to do, and she said, "You know what I might say in that situation?" I said, "Sure, I'd love to hear it." And she said, "I might say after that long share, including the portion of the share that was unevolved, less healthy, less aware, less conscious. She said, what I might say is, it's really great that you have those courageous conversations with your siblings and with your father. I'm really impressed. That's amazing. And then she was silent. And I said, so you just reinforce the positive? And she said, basically. She said, you'll do it naturally anyway. She said, you'll even the way that your face looks, the energy, you'll reinforce steps toward the authentic self. And you kind of, unless it rises to a very conscious question, a very, very conscious level, you'll kind of ignore, become uninterested in the false self, the inauthentic self, the persona, the image, right? So part of why I bring this into this question is you'll naturally encourage the authentic self and the growth. But in this case, I'm suspecting that there's probably something organic or developmental that's a part of it. And you might have to figure out how to navigate a conversation and the risks that are involved. That's up to you. And you might also have to hold space and wait for the world to teach him those things. And again, if it gets to the point where it's uncomfortable and unpleasant, I have had to say to my children at times, you need to take a shower. Not because I'm morally opposed to your level of hygiene, but because it doesn't smell good and it's off-putting. And if you want to be in the same room with me, this is the way that it's going to have to be. These are difficult, subtle, nuanced questions you guys are asking today. Somebody asked the question, how will my son ever trust me again after I had him transported to wilderness? It was to save his life, but our relationship is damaged. I've written a blog on this. I'm going to re-release this blog under the Finding You blog soon. But he'll forgive you when he grows up. He'll forgive you when he matures. I don't happen to think that transport is a violation of it's not an unhealthy choice by a parent. In my experience, actually, it is an assertive, courageous, healthy choice. And that if children would go willingly in these situations, then transport would be irrelevant. It wouldn't exist. So when he grows up and sees his part in it, that's when he'll forgive you. When he does his work, he'll forgive you. As he matures, he'll forgive you. As he gets healthier, he'll forgive you. Let's use the example of a mistake that you made that we all agree was a mistake. Not just him, like yelling at him, which I'm sure you've done because you're a human parent. Or just pick something simple, something generic that you've done, because every parent dents their children. Every parent makes mistakes. When is he going to forgive you for that? Same answer. When he gets healthier. I wouldn't try to defend it. I wouldn't try to prove to him that you're right. I wouldn't write or talk when you have a chance to talk to him to talk about how the fact. I wouldn't say what I just said. I wouldn't say we had no other choice. I would just say, I'm sorry. Maybe it was the wrong thing. We did the best we could and it could have been wrong. That's the energy that they need. They get to be mad. But there's one other really important principle that I've talked about, especially as the media pushback and the headwinds have come on so strong over the past few years. What I will say to you is that it is a betrayal. But when I was getting my doctoral degree, one of the techniques or idea that they shared in parent education is there's such thing as a healthy betrayal. If you've given in, I'm going to use a silly example. If you've given in to your child by giving them candy at the cashier checkout stand over a period of time, several times, you've given in and you finally decide, I'm not going to cave. I'm going to let them throw the tantrum. That is a betrayal. So in a way, you did betray him. You betrayed the old implicit contract, the old way of being, the old unspoken agreement. So I wouldn't defend it. I wouldn't debate with him about the rightness of it or the necessity of it. If I was you, I wouldn't do any of that. I would let him feel betrayed. I would apologize generically, like, I'm sorry. Maybe it was a mistake and you get to be mad and I didn't know what to do. And thank you for telling me. Just give space for him and let him figure it out. But that's one of the things that children have, I think, so systemically weaponized over the course of even my career. By the way, the first 15 years of doing this work as a wilderness therapist, I'm not a wilderness therapist anymore, and I don't run a wilderness program anymore. But when I did, the kids never talked about the trauma of transport. And I don't even think it was as good then as it is now. They didn't call it gooning. They knew. They knew. They knew all that we would say to them if we were going to explain ourselves as parents. They understood it. But there's this energy that if you hurt a child, you've traumatized them, and that's not true. Being hurt and being traumatized is not the same thing. And I think there is this cultural, it's in the zeitgeist, right? It's in this period of time that if a child is hurt, that they are betrayed and traumatized. So your child will forgive you, and the opportunity for reconnection, for repairing the connection will happen as he grows and as you grow. You know, that's important. Do your work. Come to a Finding You intensive. Get a therapist if you don't have one. Read the books. Listen to the podcast. Do your work. And I think in doing your work, you'll feel a great sense of peace, of confidence, of calmness, of clarity, so that when he lashes out in anger in his letters with how you betrayed him, you won't have a need to defend it because you'll be okay with who you are. In fact, you'll hold more compassion, more empathy. You'll have a more capable listening ear for your son in that case. Great question that gets asked a lot. Somebody says, the answer I gave to my son, as per Brad, was I made the best decision I could at the time, and if it was wrong, I am sorry. That was about 3 years ago. I have not heard a word from him since about sending him to programs. You know, I think one of the reasons why children have become so vocal, not the only reasons, but one of the reasons why children have become so vocal on this platform, this social media platform, and on Reddit and on all of the channels, is because they don't feel listened to. Their anger isn't held by their parents. Their parents have either washed their hands of it, they've been unwilling to have a discussion at all, or unwilling to own the decision and feel the hurt, the anger, the sadness, the disappointment, the betrayal that is, of course, connected to that. And because of that, they go after programs and professionals. They want to feel heard. They want to feel seen. I'll say one last thing before I go away from this. It's okay if you've given space, even if you haven't given space, by the way. It's okay to say, I can't listen to this now. And Al-Anon, the phrase that they use to teach this idea that I'm talking about right now is no is a complete sentence. You don't have to justify yourself and your decisions and your boundaries. So if you've listened and they're still talking and they're still punishing you, you can cut them off. If you lack capacity and you haven't even listened once yet, you can still say, I'm not open to hearing this right now. You get to decide. The boundary that you decide on is okay. You get to decide it. And you get to be a person in this equation. So I would encourage you to practice some of the skills, but you don't have to. The command, the idea isn't to become a doormat. The idea isn't even in all of this work and all this communication training. The idea isn't to ignore your feelings, to get your feelings hurt, to feel attacked, and then just to shove it down because you shouldn't be feeling that way. That's not the work. The work is that you arrive at a point where it doesn't hurt, where it goes right through you. I did a broadcast on a book called You Are Special by Max, and the last name starts with an L. It was an Italian name, I think Lucato, or I might be getting that wrong, but it's called You Are Special. It's a children's book. I love that book. It's about the idea of this one puppet that had all these gray stickers, these criticisms, labels, and they would the members of this puppet community would put gray stickers, gray dots on people when they wanted to insult them or make them feel bad or put them down. And this puppet, the main character, had Punchinello, had all of these, or that might be the name of the puppet master. Anyway, had all of these gray dots, and then found somebody with no dots on them. In this same community, people put stars on people to compliment them, to say you're wonderful, you're beautiful, you dance well, you sing well, you're smart. So people would walk around with lots of stars on them and a couple of gray dots. But the main character finally finds this other puppet that has no stickers on them at all. And this puppet with all the gray dots, carrying around all the insults, says to this other puppet, what's going on? I've never seen anybody like you before. And the puppet without stickers said, I went to my maker, basically. I think it's an analogy for God, but I went to my source. And I spent time with my source. And then all of the stickers fell off of me. The stars fell off of me. The gray dots fell off of me. It's a wonderful children's book. I encourage you to buy it and read it. You can read the whole thing in 2 minutes, or you can listen to my broadcast. But the point of this story is the work doesn't give you strength to not fight with your spouse when you're upregulated. It doesn't give you strength to take anything from your child, no matter how upset they are. The work changes you so that you know when you're regulated or not, and you take space. And then you're not able or capable of listening. You tell your partner or friend or parent, I can't listen. Or when you're full up with giving and listening, you can say to your child, to your spouse, I can't do this anymore. I need some time. That's what the work does. You can't be the Buddha in every situation. But you can be the Buddha by taking time to yourself, by resting, by eating, by exercising, by doing whatever it is that is self-care, by watching a ball game, by taking a vacation, by taking some space, so that when you show up to these relationships, you have more capacity. But I think what people hear, because we so much in psychology, so much in self-help, so much in this kind of psychoeducation, people are listening to the behaviors of what to do in a situation. But in my way of teaching, my way of thinking, there's so much that goes into the equation before you come to that moment that if you don't do, nobody can be the Buddha if they are tired and hungry and exhausted and stressed out. And if they try to be the Buddha in that moment, in terms of just, I'm just going to take it, it's going to end up in a fight. It's going to end up in both people getting hurt. But if they can say, I'm not ready, I can't do this now, I need a timeout, that's the Buddha or Yoda, or pick your hero, your guru. The secret isn't to show up to anything. It's to take care of yourself, to know yourself, and then to have the courage and to take the risk to set the subsequent boundaries in relationships and conversations that you need for you. And eventually your capacity grows. Eventually the stickers don't stick anymore. Neither do the compliments, by the way, because it's not about you. It's like the book, The Four Agreements. One of the agreements is don't take anything personal, which I don't really like that phrasing, but this is what he's saying. He says, what people think about you is about them. People can only show up to you, to the relationship, to the level of their consciousness. And the more you know yourself, the more you're clear about what's yours and what's not. So, great questions. All right. Looks like that's all the questions for this evening. Thanks for joining me. Glad to see so many of you here. As you know, our intensive program, Finding You Intensives and Coaching, is just launched. We have dates on our calendar, October 23rd through 27th. There still is a spot there for the in-person intensive in Midway, Utah. We have a virtual one set up in November. We might do an in-person one if there's enough need. And then in December 4th through 8th, there's another in-person intensive in Midway, Utah. We're also going to be announcing attachment-based therapy classes, a master class, and the conscious parenting workshops, which we've done before. Any information, all things Finding You, email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. I'm going to start a webinar subscription soon, starting next month. And if you want to be involved in the webinar subscription, contact info@findingyouprograms.com. And of course, if you're looking for the podcast, you don't have to look anywhere else. They're in the same place. Excuse me. They're in the same place, almost the same name, the same host, with just a slightly different look and under a new umbrella. My next broadcast will be one of my favorites, maybe my very favorite, and the one that's nearest and dearest to my heart because it's the issue I struggle with the most. It's next Tuesday, October 8th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and the name of it is Being Right versus Being a Self. All right, folks, as always, thanks you for joining me. On behalf of the people that love you and the people that you love, thanks for showing up to this work. It makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.